Away. Now, joining me today is Craig Kensley, the founder and executive director of GrowZA Social Investment Agency. He's here to give us insights into the current South African social investment sector and what organizations can do to up their social investment game. Craig, welcome to InnoStation.
Hey, thanks very much, Cami. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for coming. Now, I think to get us
When
started,
Cami invites you somewhere, then you make sure that you arrive. So I just want to say I felt compelled, but very happy to be here.
Well, I appreciate you being here, Craig. Thank you. Now, I think let's help the audience to get to know you a little bit. Tell us who Craig is and what fuels your inner fire.
Yeah, so I'm a boy from Bellville in Cape Town. I had a pretty ordinary kind of working class upbringing, and had a very special kind of rootedness. I think as a result of that, it's not yet a rags to riches story. It was never rags, you know. The kind of normalness of how I grew up, I really value that. And what my parents instilled, I think it translates now into my family life. I'm very happily married to a beautiful woman. We have two gorgeous daughters, 16 and 11, and that really is at the core of my mind and my heart, and then everything kind of radiates from there. So that's me.
Oh, lovely. Family oriented. Love that. Now, you are the founder, as we said, of GrowZA Social Investment Agency. Tell us a little bit about the agency and what inspired you to get started.
Yeah, thanks. I've worked in the NGO and nonprofit sector my entire professional career, and saw the landscape shifting, particularly the funding landscape, and then what grew into now social investment landscape. We saw that shifting in interesting ways. The way I've always activated is as a development consultant in the space, building white label professional services offerings with and for development players and NGOs. What we then saw was this particular shift, and funders needing an additional level of professional services support. How that manifests is really in terms of this new and growing discipline of sustainability, a deeper understanding of what ESG could be, and the language that wraps around that. And effectively, our play into the market and our contribution is this move towards the shared language of impact and how we activate development funding and resources to accelerate social progress. So that's the point of synthesis for us, is responding to the market, seeing that there are development resources available and there are quite significant growth opportunities available, where we are able to do incredible work and have really, really profound impact. And we position ourselves there to support funders, to support multinationals in delivering on that promise.
Awesome. Now tell me, Craig, in your personal opinion, how would you say that we're doing in the social investment landscape in South Africa? And do you think we have a lot of opportunities in this space?
Yeah, I think it depends how you look at it. You know, there's obviously many layers and levels to it. I think from a legislative and a policy perspective, we have a very progressive kind of set of frameworks that inform the space.
Yeah.
So I think we're doing well from a base perspective to have demonstrated the will, have hardwired a pipeline of revenue and of support to communities. So I think from that perspective, there's a lot to be positive about. I think in terms of the practice, it is shifting, and any kind of shift, there are challenges. A comment that I've made to you when we've had previous conversations is that a lot of the spend is discretionary. And so you have development actors or funders who are able to inform their own development agenda. That presents with it, it's a double-edged sword, right? It presents with it a set of opportunities in that they are sometimes open to being advised and open to kind of what the sector needs and what the professionals in the sector are sort of building. There's the other, the blunt end of the sword, which really speaks to the fact that you often have those who are not development professionals making decisions about the directing of development resources, which brings with it an inherent set of risk, really. So not challenges, challenges of course, but risk, because the work we do in communities, these are lives, these are people, and the work we do has an impact, both negative and positive, and then this understanding of what sustainability looks like does become quite gray when there is all this discussion. So I'm not advocating for an overly regulated sector, certainly not that. But certainly kind of trying to draw out of the market an openness to saying, well, what is this shared agenda? I mean, we have many global mandates, if I could call it that, frameworks and so on, very important discussions, very progressive work that's being done around ESG, for example, around the SDGs, important conversations happening at T20 and G20. The question becomes, what does that mean in Hammanskraal? And that's the nexus, you know, that's where we are looking to, where we partner, and that's where we look like it.
Cool. Now, in a previous conversation that you had, you stated that the African turnaround story is going to be funded from outside of Africa because we export so many of our resources into other countries. From what you've observed, why are we so quick to sell our resources instead of using them in country?
I think that maybe we euphemize it when we say we export so much of our services. Right? We have a very deep colonial history on the continent, of course, and I'm not an historian. But I think that a lot of where we find ourselves now is a product of trade agreements, is a product of colonization, is a product of where our people and our communities find themselves. We need only kind of zoom into the South African context and see just from a spatial planning perspective where communities have been placed and what that means in terms of the movement of goods and services and the economic dynamics that play out as a result of that. So I think it's really a compounded position that we find ourselves in now. And I'm not an economist, right? I'm a social investment specialist. So from an economics point of view, from a layman's perspective, I'm saying that there's a lot of pressure in terms of how resources move out of the continent. And that's a very well-established pipeline. How resources move into the continent now, it's moving against the flow, in a sense. And more and more what's happening is that the new leadership is coming in and saying, hold on, let's have these conversations. How are these deals being structured? Why are they being structured in that way? How is it we are going to, how is it that we are going to partner? And really it's a partnership conversation. So we are not, and we are not activists in the space. We are development professionals. And so from that perspective, we come and we say, well, what does this partnership look like? So we are characterizing something as a partnership. These are the hallmarks of partnership, is that there's mutual benefit and mutual growth. So these are our terms. And I think that that's where we're seeing a very interesting shift, also from a policy perspective. And that's why when I make the comment that the turnaround project can be funded from outside of Africa, is because that's what's appropriate. Is because that's where what the development sector is seeing, and also that's our history, and that's where we That's where we come from. And maybe just the last statement there is it's certainly not a statement of disempowerment. It's certainly not a statement
Yeah.
of handing over agency and saying that we're going to be
Yeah.
saved from outside of Africa. It's about taking our
Of course.
rightful place and saying, well, this is our voice. This is what is appropriate. There's a quote that I love. It says, help is not help if it's what's needed.
Right. Yeah.
And that's so important. This is not charity. This is not anybody helping Africa. This is the global development project that's playing out in Africa in a particular way.
Yeah.
And we are saying, here's the clear proposition, and this is the context. Let's go.
Right. That's a great perspective to have. Help is not help if it's needed. Yeah. Because that is very true. It is
Mm.
what is happening globally, really playing out in Africa as well. Now,
It happens
one of the
it
many
happens in our
reasons,
families too, right? I'm sorry to cut you, but
right?
isn't
Yeah.
it what happens in our families as well? Is that we'll
Yeah.
look and we'll see an uncle, aunt, a cousin, and we say, well, let's help. If that's what they need, it's not help, it's our responsibility.
Right. Yeah. Now, one of the main reasons why companies or organizations want to invest or develop communities is for philanthropy or charity. And this is a just cause. But what do you think people often miss when investing in community development?
They miss friends in development. They miss the professionals in the space, the
Yeah.
people who are equipped to advise them responsibly, to build the
Hmm.
programs of impact, and to shepherd the spend. Now that sounds
Right.
like a clumsy plug for GrowZA and our partners in the space, and I suppose it is that to some extent, but but I think that's what's missing. You know, I think if you're gonna build, if you want a wall built, Cami, then you're not going to ask the plumber to
Right.
build a wall
Yeah.
in front of your house, right? You're going to go to a construction company. And I think that's what's missing, the basic kind of logic around development and this sense that community work is something that can be done on a part-time basis. It's something that can be done as, I don't want to say frivolously because that's not fair, but I feel like it's something that, like,
Yeah.
yeah, I do community work. You know, I spend time in communities kind of over the weekend. It's charity, that's not development. And there's quite a distinction there. And even with charity, I mean, you can have that whole conversation, but even with charity, there are a couple of very clear guidelines and risks that those who go into those spaces must be aware of. So to your question, what is missing? What is missing is the stewardship of development funding by those who generate it, in terms of
Right.
how it lands in communities. And I think I must say, I'm very optimistic. It is shifting. It is something that is moving in what we consider to be the right direction. But certainly, it's something that can be
Mm.
accelerated, and it is not something that is particularly complicated to accelerate. There are enough GrowZAs out there to advise and to work with these partners.
Yeah. Awesome. Now, we've just touched on community development, and I want to go deeper into that topic a little bit. In South Africa, we've been going through a bit of an unemployment crisis for several years now. We have one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, and we also have a shortage of skilled workers in various fields. Despite there being a demand for employment, however, there also seems to be a lack of respect, or like a perspective that certain industries or certain jobs are less professional than others. How can we bridge this gap? How do you think that the bridge between the need for employment and sort of the perception of different types of jobs or certain jobs, how do we bridge that gap?
Mhm. It's a generational challenge on the one hand. So I'm going to start with the last set of comments you made and work back to the first. So I think it's a generational challenge
Yeah.
in terms of how work is viewed. I've no doubt, I can make a safe bet, Cami, that what a good job looks like to your parents looks a very particular way. And that's been the case, I
Yeah.
think, generations deep. It does come back from the dynamic around what dignity looks like. And that's
Right.
also shaping in a very interesting way, because if you wore a suit to work, then you were doing well. If you wore an overall to work,
Mm-hmm.
then it's a case of like, just keep going, you'll get there someday, you know. And that's been a narrative
Yeah.
that really lives and looms large in the minds of still our young people today. A route out of it,
Mm-hmm.
again, is multi-pronged. There's the reason we in India on this research project is we're busy working with university in India and university in Sweden on the future of digital work. And again, looking at the gig economy, for example, and the upside benefits of that, but then also the relative invisibility of workers on digital platforms. And so there's
Right.
a dignity piece within all of that that we really do need to look at. So opportunities are coming into the market. Opportunities are becoming more abundant. How are we moving in that direction? So let's look at a sector
Mm-hmm.
or a sectoral channel, for example. We need 30,000 artisans a year in South Africa. We currently train and produce about 15,000. So
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about a vacuum of skills, that exists. It's there.
Yeah.
We need plumbers, electricians, etc., etc., etc. Now, that's an unqualified statement. What type of plumbers? What type of electricians?
Right.
Etc., etc. So there's, for example, the opportunities that renewable energy brings, and I'm not just talking about kind of solar, PV, etc., etc. I'm talking about kind of the massive influx of independent power producers into this country that are doing offshore oil and gas exploration, that are doing
Mm-hmm.
wind energy, solar energy, etc., etc., and all the allied industries that are associated with that. There are opportunities flooding into the country, and what we need to do is align from a skills perspective. And then I think from an earlier
Right.
point, it's about shifting the generational perception of work, and
Mm-hmm.
looking at the top end what it is to live in this digital world, to transit in this digital world, to make a life for ourselves. What is balance? Where work used to be the majority of our day, and we kind of go home to sleep. That has
Yeah.
also shifted at the top end of the market. That has shifted. So how do we reshape this concept of work on the one hand, and that's somewhat philosophical, but then what is the economic activity project? So I think when we look at jobs, it's something that we reach for. It's very much on the top shelf. It's attainable. We can do it. We can get there. I think something that's on one of the lower shelves is this journey through understanding economic activity. How do we get our young people in particular economically active? And there are
Yeah.
many practical
Mm-hmm.
levers in terms of moving us in that direction. So it begins to stack up, as we go. I think there's a fantastic growth story that is playing out. We look at the crisis, and it is a crisis. So I'm not underplaying that at all. But when
Yeah.
we zoom out just half a click, the opportunity landscape is significant. It really is significant. And I think it's about, again, to your earlier point, imagine if development funders were exposed to that conversation, were
Right.
curious about how do we stack that up. And there are many that are. But imagine that their spend wasn't as discretionary as it is. And we could say
Yeah.
in a focused way, this is the program that we buy into. How are we building these layers? How are we stacking them on top of each other? And then communication professionals like yourself, we're able to influence the national psyche, the national narrative around work, around jobs, around dignity. and development professionals like ourselves are able to come and
Right.
build these growth pathways. And then training institutions and institutions of higher learning are able to come in and make offerings. And then our schools kind of activate in a new way because we have this trickle down where there's a deeper understanding of vocational guidance. Remember, vocational guidance at school? Wait, are you of the vocational guidance
Yes.
generation, or is it just me? You life orientation, right? You look
No,
like a hello
we
girl.
hadn't. I'm like an allo girl, but we did have like these career drives where different universities, different industry professionals would come to our schools to sort of give insight into their different industries as well. I think
And
that's
it
similar.
was incredibly boring, wasn't it? If you had no idea what you wanted to do, was that helpful?
Yeah,
Is my question. I think to some people it would have been, absolutely. So I'm not writing that off. But again, the way in which we present opportunities, frame opportunities. No, like
yeah,
I'll take a bet that none of your classmates went to the boilermaker table. Said, I want to be a boilermaker. I want to be a
no,
plumber. Everybody said accountant, engineer, communications professional, lawyer. And this was not too long ago. This is still happening in our schools.
yeah.
This is still happening in our homes, around our dinner tables. This is still the conversation. And so, I mean, I can ramble on, but I think you get the point I'm clumsily trying to make.
Yes. Now, actually, I think that is actually very interesting because even now I see videos of people speaking about how like content creation and things and like more digital roles are the new 9 to 5. And it's like are even our jobs like dying out? Because pretty soon like I listen to my siblings' generation and they're not talking about like being a lawyer, being an accountant, or being an artisan. None of that. It's very much I want to be an influencer. I want to be a YouTuber. I want to be a gamer. I want to be a this. And yeah, it's crazy how that works because it is very
Absolutely,
generational. Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, tell me, what does true corporate social responsibility look like in action? And what measures or indicators do you think corporations should be aligning their CSR strategy to fall in line with sort of what true corporate social responsibility looks like?
It's a dangerous question that you're asking me.
Is it?
Hand hand your money over to communities.
Hmm.
Hand it over. What does that mean? Hand over I'm not saying controls. I'm not saying be reckless. I'm saying let's
Yeah.
detach our corporate ego from funds meant for communities. So
Right.
that's the and now there are many strands there. So that could be viewed as a blunt statement. It really isn't. But there are many strands. That is not saying let's be responsible. That is not saying let's introduce risk. That is not saying any of those things. But
Hmm.
very often we get caught up in these loops where we are all primed. When we put an opportunity on the table, we are all primed to call out what's wrong with the opportunity or call out what's not
Right.
going to work for the opportunity. And then what compounds that is that we are rewarded. Those of us who are able to find the most mistakes. Cammie's so smart. She's so analytical. She really is. It's not helpful.
Hmm.
So again, I'm not saying let's not point out where there's risk and let's not point where we're irresponsible. But it certainly is a case of how do we make the case within this framework, within this governance
Hmm.
environment? How do we make the case for supporting this community in a way that feeds into the broader development project? How do we find a way, as opposed to often the tone of that's not going to work. No,
Yeah.
no, no. You see, I think that we, when we come around the table and we say how do we hand over our money to the community? If that's the intention, if that's where we're
Right.
coming from, if that's our North Star, to say like this money needs to go, it needs to land in these communities in a real way. We then
Mm-hmm.
go to, who are the people that understand how this works? I'm an accountant, I'm an engineer, I'm a lawyer, and these are the chairs of these committees.
Right.
They sit and they decide from that perspective. And it becomes a very interesting conversation and proposition when we say, how do we introduce equity into this conversation around
Mm.
how resources are set? And then to the second part of your question, what are the principles? Because that was sentiment, right? And structure.
Yeah.
Um, what are the principles that inform it? There's some very progressive work that's coming out of many sectors. One is around the Sustainable Development Goals. Even that has begun to shift because Sustainable Development Goals are pointing us towards 2050. We're not going to meet those goals. But
Mm-hmm.
there are targets and indicators within the Sustainable Development Goals that have been, for example, in the South African context, that have been domesticated. We work with
Mm.
Statistics South Africa on the United Nations country report, which speaks about the domestication of indicators, what is our progress towards that, and so on. And what's interesting about what lives inside that project is the development data that's coming from the ground. And we are
Yeah.
saying, well, what are our challenges in terms of kind of foundation phase literacy? What are the
Mm.
challenges there? And we may be in a position where we're saying, well, it's a blind spot for us. We don't know what we don't know. And so that
Right.
may well be the first point of investment. I'm not saying it is, I'm saying it may well, just as a thought experiment. And so
Mm-hmm.
while sometimes we rush to paint early childhood development centers, maybe we should be talking to Stats SA and saying, where's the blind spots in terms of development data? How do we improve the
Right.
quality of the system so that holistically we are able to move? And again, I think that's a bit of a theme throughout this conversation, right? So
Yeah.
it's looking for the indicators and playing according to your scorecard. So I'm very pragmatic as far as that is concerned. Companies that operate in South Africa are subject to the triple BE scorecard. There are
Mm-hmm.
inherent opportunities in leveraging that scorecard. Um, Multinational, all companies really are subject to a certain level of ESG, economic, social, and governance compliance, or environmental,
Mm.
social, and governance compliance. Uh, and what are the opportunities within those frameworks to deliver value? So
Right.
I can split principles and frameworks kind of all day. It's about taking it to those tables, breaking them apart, and then bringing a professional humility around saying, do I understand what I'm looking at? And
Yeah.
do I have enough information to inform a social investment plan, a social investment strategy? Do I have enough information? Am I the guy? And if
Mm.
I'm not the guy, who can I go
Then
to?
Craig's the guy.
Well, I mean, you said it, not me.
Wow. Now, moving on from dangerous questions to lighter questions. One of your hobbies that you love is photography. Do you
Hmm.
have a specific photograph or a video that is particularly close to your heart that you've taken?
Um, I didn't take enough pics of my mom. She
Ah,
passed away. She passed away 2 years ago,
mm,
and I didn't take enough photographs of her. And I think if I and I would never have taken enough. I mean, that's just the nature of things. I think
right, yeah,
if I had, those would be my favorite. Those would be my favorite images, especially now,
yeah.
looking back and reminiscing and so on. So I think that's my answer to that part of the question. There was a second part you asked.
No, 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 that was the
Oh no,
question.
what? There was a second part to my answer. Right? It was immediately when you said that it made me think. It made me think of that. The second part, I think, that of the answer that I want to give is that I think there's a very interesting psychology in self documentation.
Yeah,
I went to an event once. I don't want to call it a course. It was more of an event and a talk where somebody was talking about the psychology of the selfie, right? And I think, and that sounds a little cheesy maybe, but I think that when we say selfie, we kind of picture this, right? Um,
Right.
but what was spoken about is the journey of self-documentation, and that a selfie is not only what we imagine it to be. A selfie is about
Mm.
self-documentation. Now, the process of self-documentation is incredibly important and very interesting because it teaches you a lot about how you see yourself, um, relative to how people
Yeah.
see you, and we can go down that whole rabbit hole. But I think that's been a very interesting process for me. So I really like traveling, and I often travel alone, and so I take pictures of myself, um, and
Yeah.
to play with that is incredibly interesting. I mean, there's a program, if you or any of the listeners want to Google this, it's called World to Adorn, and it speaks about young urban youth in the US and their
Mm.
journey of self-documentation and expression, the hip-hop culture, fashion, spoken word, etc., etc.
Mm.
And it's incredibly interesting. I watch my daughters now, 11 and 16. I watch how they self-document, um,
Yeah.
and the stories they tell through that. So for me, I really enjoy. This is going to sound weird. I enjoy taking pictures of myself. I don't post all of them, but the process of documenting yourself is
Yeah.
is an interesting one.
It's pretty fun, yeah. And I like the thing
Mm.
that you mentioned about sort of how you see yourself versus how other people perceive you, because it reminds me of like this meme that went around for a while where everyone was talking about the picture you take of yourself versus the one your mom has on her Facebook. And it is very interesting to see the difference because it's like two completely different perspectives.
Correct. And then also the reality, right, of you looking at your camera roll and
Mm,
and the judgment of I'm not going to post that, or no, that's not a
yeah,
flattering kind of depiction, or and it's interesting, and when you let it kind of roll through your mind, it
right.
it, it there's some interesting insights there, is what I'm saying. So I'm ranting a little, or rambling a little bit, but yeah, so that's what goes in my head.
Do you have a specific place that you would like to go to take a couple photos or videos? Do you have like a dream photography location?
I'm I'm there right now. I'm in Delhi at the moment, and
Yeah.
it's incredible. It's a feast, um, for the senses. So it's certainly a place that I'm very much enjoying being. So that's really cool.
Mhm.
Um, we've been very fortunate in that we've worked in every province in the country, in South Africa,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah.
and we have the most beautiful country, which is a cliche, right? Specifically, I think Hogsback in the Eastern Cape is underrated. I think people sleep on Hogsback. So that's an incredible place. It rivals Drakensberg. It rivals kind of Clarence in the Free State. It's something that's
Yeah.
that's very special. So that is a really beautiful location. And then home is another one for me. Whatever that
Yeah.
means, and I ever shift. So when you look at your when I look at the archive of photographs that I have, and do like a location-based filter on it, it's incredible to
Hmm.
see how my family, for example, has occupied the spaces that we call home, and it's done
Yeah.
this, you know. And they and
Right.
being able to see that is, yeah, it's really beautiful. And then to see the people that have moved through, and the occasions and the moments, and the things that have happened. Um, and maybe the last comment there is I think to be deliberate also about that documentation.
Right.
My I come back maybe full circle a little bit, but my mother was like, take a photograph. She'd always say that, and
Yeah.
some people would roll their eyes and go, "Ah, this woman with the photograph." But that deliberate documentation is important, because as you then look and see how spaces kind of develop and shape. There was a time when I lost weight, and then I look at those photographs, and I look at photographs now, and I think like, yeah, okay, I can't blame COVID anymore. I used to be able to do that.
No, none of us can blame COVID anymore. Those kinds of pictures in particular, super depressing.
For sure.
Okay, this has been such a lovely chat. And before I let you go, I would love to play a round of hot takes with you. How it works is I
I
just ask
only have
you
hot
a
takes.
series. Do you
That's all I've
only?
got.
Then you
That's
love
all
this
I've got.
game.
Okay, let's go.
I think you love this game. I'm going to ask you a series of rapid fire questions, and then you're going to answer with hot or not. And then if there's one you want to explore a little bit more, then sure. Awesome. Tell me how you feel about street art
Hot.
and film
Should I
cameras,
expand?
if you want to.
No, okay, cool. Let's just go. Sorry, the second one, I missed it.
The second one is film cameras.
Film cameras,
like the ones with the strip, you know, the ones.
Yeah, no, I know exactly. They're very cool. I think they've been nixed by hipsters. I think they have their place. But I really enjoy kind of shooting on my phone. The native technology that's in phones now is amazing. I think it has its place, but I don't think it should ever be a prop. And I think it is a prop sometimes.
True. How do you feel about pineapple on pizza? Careful with your answer. Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Amazing. Who doesn't want a pop of like sweetness and acidity?
What's the savory, right?
It's like umami, right? It's like the definition of umami, and people are like, I'm like, listen, yeah.
It's crazy how it's crazy how that particular conversation actually puts people at odds so much. It's like it's not that serious. It's actually pretty good.
Absolutely.
Right. How do you feel about community outreach programs?
Not hot. I think it's unimaginative often. I think it's often contrived, and it holds so much more potential. It's a wasted opportunity often.
Right.
Yeah. So I think the rest I said during our interview.
Yeah, and I actually share that sentiment. I think with community, especially like with things like volunteer programs as well, I think it's great when it's sustainable. It's great when it's consistent. But there's a lot of like seasonal things that happen. And it's like, well, it's 12 months in the year and people need certain things 12 months in the year. So why not?
Yeah. There's a saying in the development sector, when grants become salaries, you have a problem.
Right. Yeah.
And when charity or CSI becomes compliance, you have the same problem.
Right. Yeah. And that is very true. How do you feel about camping in the wilderness?
Alone, hot. With my wife, not. She's not a camper. She's like high thread count, linen.
Yeah.
So I'm a happily married man. I plan to maintain that status, and so on the record, I'm gonna say, as a couple and as a family man, not. But if it was just me, then hot.
No, take her glamping. It's like a happy medium. You still have the, really.
A tent.
How do you feel?
I can see a tent. She's like, no.
She's like, no, thank you.
No. Short conversation.
How do you feel about socks to bed? Do you sleep with your socks on or off?
So it's contextual. If it's really good, seamless socks, that's highly breathable, I'm here for it. I've never a problem in winter. We're all good. But if it's the socks you've been wearing all day, absolutely not. If it's standard, if it's a standard kind of Chinatown special with this massive pronunciation, let's not do that. So it can work. it can work. Seamless, high quality, highly breathable. You're good.
Oh, and that's fair enough. I'm just like, I
Yeah,
don't know. They come off anyway.
yeah. Well,
uh,
there you go.
how do you feel about Wes Anderson's films?
Sure. Very good. Very good. I think what's
Mm,
interesting now is that it's interesting that kind of slipped in mainstream kind of consciousness. So it's
mm-hmm.
always interesting. It's always interesting when that happens. And then I
Yeah,
think when you follow kind of where Wes Anderson comes from, and you look at
yeah,
influences like Werner Herzog and so on, it takes you, I dare say, it takes you to a realer place in terms of the
yeah.
genesis, of that type of movie. So yeah, it's great. It's a mimetic, I think is what it's called, and it draws people into deeper conversations. I think that's really cool.
Cool. How do you feel about urban farming?
Hot. I think it's.
Right?
I think we're sleeping on it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's. I think it's going to become like increasingly important from a sustainability perspective, of course,
Yeah,
but that's quite conservative and staid. But I think also in terms of the hyperlocality of the communities we're building. And the fact
right.
that, I mean, you obviously, I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of like a 15-minute city and so on. So the
Yeah,
lives that we build are becoming more and more concentrated, and there's an argument against that, of course. But also the hyperlocality of supply chains. So the fact that we're able to
mm,
um, feed ourselves and each other, but then the last comment, the dynamic in terms of community, the dynamic in terms of family that brings,
yeah.
I think is predominantly what slept on. So we can meet all of these other kind of outcomes, which I think is great. Uh, and it also feeds into the narrative that we were talking about in terms of young people becoming farmers.
Yeah,
So that's not seen as something that's viable or something that's sexy or attractive or whatever the case is. So I think urban farms bring that closer. And we
yeah.
need those kind of playgrounds for young people to kind of touch and interact. I
We
think the
do.
last dynamic is it also allows for young people to interact with older people. And
Right,
I think
as
that
well. Yeah,
that's incredibly important because the conversations that happen when young people and old people kind of interact, I think that's also the beauty of artisan training,
mm,
because you have these master carpenters and master plumbers and master electricians that have seen many summers and years
yes.
of kind of green youngster coming through, and he gets to hang out with uncle. That's a good thing.
Yeah, that is a very good thing. I think the thing with urban farms though is a lot of people I find are intimidated by the idea of just raising plants in general. I see it even in like the plant mom and dad community where like people get their first house plant and it's a thing. It's like, oh my gosh, how do I keep this thing alive? How do I? And I'm like, no, you can develop a green thumb. You can it's
Yeah,
pretty hard to kill
yeah.
a plant. And you can from that I think you can grow the confidence to sort of venture out into growing your own herbs and then your own this and your own that. Yeah, I think it's cool.
But I also like how this translates and loops back to our previous conversation. Would you start an urban garden or an urban farm without consulting a farmer?
No.
But you'd go
Or at
into a
the very least
community,
the people at the
but you
plant
would,
store.
but you would go into a community and spend money slapping paint on a wall without consulting
Yeah.
anyone.
That's a great point. That's actually a great point. Yeah. Hmm. How do you feel about movies that are over 3 hours long?
Oh, it's contextual. I don't know when last I watched a movie that's over 3 hours long.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I think it depends. I think it's brave. I'm here for the creative pursuit and for people packaging things they love. I don't know that it's going to be a commercial success. Um,
Yeah.
but I think what's interesting is kind of the resurgence of kind of long form content,
Yeah.
and how audiences are sitting down, and so maybe there's a move towards that. I mean, podcasts kind of have done it incredibly well, and we understand why. And
Yeah.
maybe there's a move back there. I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, I tried to watch the Cleopatra film with Elizabeth Taylor, and that's like about just over 4 hours, and it was impossible. It actually
Yeah.
was impossible. I think the reason it works so well with podcasts and things is because there's so much dynamicism there. Like the conversation flows in different
Yes.
directions. And whereas with a movie, it's that one storyline and we're sort of moving
But you
into
know
like
what's
this one
interesting, right?
direction.
Maybe there's something really interesting here because I think it's about building a world of context around it. So if you, for example, um, read up and did some research on the history of Cleopatra
Yeah.
and the essence that the filmmaker was trying to communicate, that's really
Yeah.
interesting. I think when we go to places like um, the Apartheid Museum, for example,
Right.
it's a bit of a macabre example, but you go to the Apartheid Museum and you do some reading before. Then you go and
Hmm.
see, and you have lines of inquiry. It just you could spend all day there. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I had an interesting experience. We had the opportunity to visit the Palace of Versailles, and I
Hmm.
hadn't watched the series. And somebody that was traveling with us had watched the series and was
Hmm.
having this parallel experience right next to me. And I'm like, "What do you like?" I mean, vivid, almost hallucinations, you know? In the,
Yeah.
oh my God, this is the wall of mirrors. When you, and then spoke to
Yes.
somebody else that watched the series. Do you remember when they did this and that? And I was like, okay, it's pretty, but, and I have a vague understanding of the history, but they
Yeah.
had this contextual kind of rootedness. And
Yeah.
I think if you bring that to a 3 hour movie, it's a different game.
I mean, it could work. Cleopatra's like one of my favorite historical figures. So going in, I knew like a lot about Cleopatra. I was just like, I don't love her this much.
So
Now,
crazy.
how do you feel about drone shots?
Drone shots.
Hmm.
Oh, I love drones for many reasons. That can be another
Yeah.
kind of conversation we have. I'm involved at the Drone Academy, where we teach young people to
Oh,
become commercial drone pilots, as
oh, cool.
as a pathway into aviation. Um,
Mm,
so part for that reason, I love drone photography. I think what's also great about it is how it has do you remember when we used to have aerial shots and we used to be like, oh, they're in a
yeah.
helicopter or this was a high budget kind of thing? How
Yeah.
now it's become more accessible is crazy. And then now how in Google Earth Studio, you can like program fake drone shots. I don't know if you've seen that.
No.
Like almost yeah, on Google Earth Studio, you can frame up like quite hyper realistic um, 3D Google Earth maps, drone shots.
Yeah.
So if you want a drone shot of a famous stadium in the world, Google Earth
Mm,
Studio, you program it in, and it'll orbit the stadium like a drone shot, and
that
you
is
have your
so
drone
cool.
shot without putting a drone in the sky.
That's actually so cool. I'm gonna check that
Amazing.
out.
Yeah. You
That's
must. You
incredible.
must.
Thank you so much for being here today, Craig. It was so great to have you. I hope that you are going to have the best time in India. And before I let you go, I want you to plug in your socials so that everybody can sort of find you, follow the journey of GrowZA and what you guys are up to at the moment.
Perfect. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. You can find us on Instagram at
Mm-hmm,
grow.za. So if you just search GrowZA, you'll find us.
mm-hmm.
Across all platforms, if you search hashtag GrowZA, hashtag still a thing. I'm not quite
Yes.
sure. It was quite
I
nouveau.
know they
But,
are.
so hashtag GrowZA, you'll find our stuff. We have a terrible TikTok account. Um, that I'm kind of tinkering with myself. But Instagram's a
Yeah.
good place to find us, and then our website, growza.co.za.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today, Craig.
Cami, I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I really enjoyed it as well. And thank